Welcome everyone to episode 6 of the Exoskeletons and Wearable Robotics podcast. We are your hosts. My name is Bobby Marinov and I'm with the Exoskeleton Report, and with me is Professor Tom Sugar from the Wearable Robotics Association. Hi, Tom.
Hello again, Bobby. It's a joy to do another podcast with you.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. So today we're finishing up on our overview of applications of exoskeletons, and we're going to tackle the biggest application area of them all, medical exoskeletons. Are you excited?
Yes. So just for the audience to know, this is a large topic. So this will be a hard topic to go through because there's assistive devices, there's augmentative devices, there's devices for, spinal cord injury to get people standing back up. So we're going to do our best at talking about medical exoskeletons, and they're very important because they're one of the first categories where people were extremely excited about the possibilities of where this technology could assist people and where it was going. So, Bobby, How would you like to start?
I think we should just start with where people would expect us to start, which is the mobility exoskeletons that help people that either have spinal cord injury or some other mobility impairment to get up from the chair and start walking.
Right. So we're thinking about medical exoskeletons that are helping at the hip and knee. And so there's quite a few devices out there. And so I guess when I start looking at most of these devices, typically they power the hip and they power the knee. And then typically you have a passive ankle device. And these devices typically would help you stand up, walk. A lot of the devices, they have a need for crutches, or they have a need for some type of frame to help support you, or there's even some fixed frame devices. So I'm thinking about some of the original devices was like the a Locomat device was some of the original devices. You're right there, the Locomat.
Traditionally, it's a powered hip-powered knee device, so it provides motion assistance in a single plane of motion, and then you need to use crutches or a walker or some other mobility aid, or it can be suspended over an overhead lift in order to provide balance.
And the general idea here was get up and do repetitive task theory. So it used to be thought, if I had a spinal cord injury, I couldn't regain some mobility. But now the thought is, if I retrain the body and I retrain and get new neural pathways started, I can have some improvement. And so the idea then is it's all about I've got to get dosage. So it means I've got to walk. And so sometimes people have the idea like it takes a baby, a couple years, right, to learn to walk. And you're walking and you stumble and you fall and you get back up. And so this idea again is get someone in a device and have them retrain their walking.
Yeah, absolutely. So the application here is you combine the best of both worlds. A robotic device can do the same motion again and again and again and again without getting tired, and it produces the motion exactly the same again and again and again. And then you combine that with a person who could really benefit from that increased dosage, increased number of physical therapy. So one of the examples that has been explained to me is that you would need normally 3 people to ambulate a leg, and then each step is not exactly identical to the previous one. Versus with an exoskeleton, you can have one operator that assists with the balance and the controls, and now you can have double or triple as many steps in the same session. So the theory is 3 times less people, 2 times more steps.
I've read it, just to add on a little bit, I've read a couple journal papers where they talk about that it isn't always great just to have someone repeat the exact same thing. You actually do want someone standing up, maybe walking in a device, stumbling a little bit, and then trying to regain their balance. That's part of learning to walk too again. But
yeah, absolutely. And here, when we talk about powered hip, powered knee, we should note that the vast majority of these devices extend to the ankles.
Correct.
And extend to the ground.
Correct.
They support part of their own weight. And over the decade, we have seen tremendous improvement in the controllers, where now they will detect that shift in the center of mass, and then they will execute a step. Or they will detect that the user is trying to start the motion, and then they will execute the step. Or they will have the operator execute the step, or they can even be in a resistive mode where it becomes a training device. And in this entire time, the medical exoskeleton is accumulating data and understanding what you're going through.
Yeah, I might want to mention just again in this area, there is some devices like the Wondercraft device is self-balancing. Maybe I'm not positive, but maybe it's a little bit slower, but it is self-balanced, and then you don't need to have the crutches. And the people are thinking about lots of different types of systems.
So that's a wonderful transition there, where we started the discussion with what is the most common, which is a powered hip, powered knee exoskeleton. Now, when you start adding motors, we have seen hip, knee, ankle devices, which are usually for research purposes, but then you can add more motors and now get 2 degrees of motion in 2 planes. And you enter the realm of self-balancing medical exoskeletons.
And I think we should note here too that these are, as we're talking medical exoskeletons, so these are much more complicated devices because you would need to have some type of medical certification, whether it's in Europe or whether it's in the US. And I don't want to get into all of that, but just know that the community has to understand that these devices are more sophisticated, had to go through much more research, had to go through much more engineering technology, or engineering, I don't know what I would say, engineering research, I guess, just to get them out there to the marketplace.
Yeah, especially if it needs to go through FDA certification. So usually, not for all of them, but usually these lower body mobility powered exoskeletons are labeled as a class 2 device.
Right.
So they go through quite a bit of testing and certification.
Some exoskeletons were class 1, and then some exoskeletons are class 2 FDA devices. Yes.
Yeah, and some are not exoskeletons, so they're not labeled as such, but you and I would consider them to be functionally similar.
Right.
Exoskeletons.
Exactly, Bobby. I might just do a couple minutes on this topic where there is robotic bracing or orthotic bracing. And some of that orthotic bracing, the line between an orthotic brace, let's say at the elbow, versus an exoskeleton at the elbow, that line is blurred. And there is some Medicare codes for that were just out there for orthotic bracing, let's say at the elbow, and you have to have an FDA code, and then there's a Medicare code for those. And so that's fantastic for the industry, because that means insurance industry or the healthcare medical industry is willing to pay for these devices. So that's exciting news. And I think, Bobby, you had an article on your web on Exoskeleton Report talking about that, and also talking about some of there is Medicare codes for these spinal cord injury devices.
For the USA-based audience, yes, we're starting to see now medical codes for exoskeletons as well. So it's a huge step forward and a big victory. So we've touched upon the hip knee mobility devices. We've touched upon self-balancing exoskeletons that have multiple motors. It could be 12, it could be more. There's an in-between class where you're getting the benefit of ambulation, but the balancing act is supported by an external framework system. So you're suspended usually over a treadmill or over pedals, and you're still in an exoskeleton, or what we would consider an exoskeleton. And we typically call these a fixed frame, because classically there was a large frame to which the exoskeleton and the user are attached to.
And that makes sense. You'll see those in a clinic, let's say, in an advanced rehabilitation hospital, things like that. Yes.
And they have many advantages, where a lot of the modern ones now come with a built-in crane. So you can come in with your wheelchair, you get strapped in, the operator, in this case would be the physical therapist, most likely just presses a switch and you get hoisted and lifted up. You get transferred and rotated over the mobility path. Usually it's a treadmill, but we've seen now several models that have these actuated pedals, because then they let you simulate stair climbing.
Right.
You're then strapped into the robotic device, and some of them also have weight shift. Some of them have a height z-axis change that is dynamic. So there's different levels of complexity. And then you can do your physical therapy with the assistance of, usually there's some sort of a computer game or something to keep the mind occupied while you're doing this.
Okay, so under medical exoskeletons, most people would think about devices, to really help with the spinal cord injury. What would be another topic we should, that we should think about?
Well, anything where you need dosage to get steps in, to get a repetition. So it could be a traumatic brain injury where you need to relearn and practice and do more practice. It can be cerebral palsy, where the more mobilization that you have, especially at an early age, the more you can fight the effects long term. It can really be anything that requires mobilization and physical therapy. It can be post-surgery recovery. Classically, access to such physical rehabilitation has always been limited. So there has been a hope that the introduction of exoskeletons can increase access, require fewer professionals.
Well, so I think the idea would be, a lot of times is you would go to the physical therapist, you would do some training, and then you would take a device home, get more dosage, and then go back and see the physical therapist. But I think what you were getting at is really an important point. There's medical exoskeletons that are for assisting someone, right? Or there's medical exoskeletons that are for rehabilitation. So the idea is, let's say that you've had a stroke or you've had a traumatic brain injury, and I'm going to get a rehabilitation device. I'm going to use that device, let's say, for 3 to 6 months, and then I'll stop using it after I get better. And so I think that's a different marketplace, where a big area there was, shoulder and elbow and hand, where people were developing devices. So after a stroke, you would practice reaching, or you would practice feeding, and you would retrain and do some retraining and repetitive task therapy. That would be a rehabilitation device. You would use it for 3 to 6 months, and then the hope would be you would, after you improve, you'd stop using it. Any thoughts there, Bobby?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this division between in clinical exoskeletons and home use medical exoskeletons. And we haven't really seen Homeuse exoskeletons blow up in terms of popularity and usage, although that might be just a delay on what we hear in the public domain. But the shoulder is a good example where the shoulder is the most complicated joint. So it makes sense to have a robotic device that has the necessary degrees of freedom that can then track and reproduce the needed exercises in order to achieve mobilization and to restore the functional capability of the shoulder or the arm. And there have been quite a few of these. I think you have a lot of the fixed frame ones. So usually this is a device that will be wheeled to you, or you will sit down in it. They can be passive, but they're typically motorized, and they always have built-in sensors in order to detect exactly how the physical therapy is going. And some of them can be gamified. I think all of them are gamified these days.
I think they're all pushing towards the games where you reach towards an object and it's a game. How quickly can you reach there, and how accurate do you reach there, and things. Right. So I've seen, to give some examples here, there's bracing devices for the knee. There's some passive exoband devices.
All right, so if you go on the Exoskeleton Report catalog, you can click on the filters medical and then filter by application and click personal use. That is what we're looking at right now.
Yes.
And you can see that there's sampling of all categories. Hip knee powered exoskeletons that we talked about. There are some arm exoskeletons which are meant for home use, specifically the Myo Pro. They are knee only powered exoskeletons. They are passive. Hip, knee, ankle. There's hip only passive, and more. Right. And this list will always change. But companies are thinking about it. Companies are getting products out. So you're not using the exoskeleton just in a clinical setting, but you can take it home with you for permanent functional compensation.
Right. So if I hit clear again, and we just go back to medical.
And just a few words on that.
Please.
The way that that's been described to me is that the human brain is really good at compensating, which is you have an injured limb and it quickly learns to just not use it. Like you're pushing a shopping cart, for example, and you have a mobility problem in your right arm, you quickly learn to push with your left arm only. One of the advantages of these Homeuse exoskeletons is that it tries to get your whichever body part is being actuated back to functional level. So in this example here now, again, you're pushing on the shopping cart with both arms, and it gets the brain back into the habit of, this limb now has new capability that it had lost. Now let me start trying to use it again.
Yeah. There was I don't know if I'm using the exact correct term, but way back when there was some theory on what they called a constraint induced therapy. So if you had a stroke and your right arm and right hand isn't as good as it needs to be, they actually constrain your left arm. And I know this sounds a little tough, but they force you to use your right arm. And so there was some therapy like that. People look at improvements. So what happens is you would do some therapy, and then you would run some activities of daily living, and you would check to see if you improved on some standardized tests.
So I guess this is the honey and the stick. Here we're using the honey. We're giving and empowering the limb to be closer to its normal function, so as to encourage you to use it again.
Yeah. I once did some stroke therapy where, to give you an example, we had a robot and it was supposed to be assisting the affected arm, the arm that wasn't working as well. Then we said, okay, you'll wear 2 wearable robots and they'll move both arms at the same time. You moving both arms at the same time worked well because it was like, okay, I got to start, working together my arms. We also, at the same time, that same work, we did some interesting stuff where you actually did a task inside a mirror, and we did some mirror therapy where it looked like you did some mirror therapy and you were moving your left arm, but in the mirror, it looked like your right arm was moving, and you'd say, oh my gosh, my right arm is moving and it's doing quite well. And you actually saw some improvement, because the idea is you want to trick the brain. You want to get the brain to be thinking about that right arm and working. So there's always a lot of fun things out there. Please read the research. It's fun. So we were doing mirror therapies, robotic therapies, dual robotic therapies. So lots of fun and lots of good research for the community, and people should be thinking about everything that's been done.
Yeah, thank you for that. And absolutely, please, if you're listening to this, do your own research. This is just meant as an overview, and I hope that we can do deeper dives into specific topics later on.
Right. And we hope also, that would be a quick point, we hope also to get some experts to jumping in and doing some deeper dives in these areas. Love to have some experts that really focus on medical robots. I can think of a few names right now in my head that I'd love to do another podcast.
What we have here is a topic that we have not touched upon before in this podcast. We've always talked about adults being the users of exoskeletons, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. For medical exoskeletons especially, there's quite a few devices that are specifically focused for kids and young adults and teenagers and everything in between. In the past, there were even exoskeletons for babies, because early mobilization can lead to long-term benefits.
So I'm thinking out loud. I know I've seen Northern Arizona University doing some work at the ankle, bionic power. There was an article in Exoskeleton Report about bionic power, looking to get some funding to help children and help design systems for children.
Oh yeah, that's right. They're doing crowdfunding. If they get enough money, they're going to send out several dozen units to Canadian children that can benefit from them.
Yes, right. And it's certainly important to think about how to get exoskeleton devices for young children.
The pediatric devices come in all shape, sizes, and applications. There's the already mentioned fixed frame ones. There's the powered hip knee. There's braces. There's upper body devices. Is there a power glove that's pediatric? I can't remember. I don't think so. But there are some fixed frame upper body.
Right. And this research is challenging. I give high regards to the people working in it, because I once looked into it. And so people have to know, when you're trying to do research and you need to get all of that testing and research done, and you need to show that to the FDA, you have to get IRB approval, from the parents, from the children, and then from the university, and then do the work. So there's a lot of extra steps when you're doing research with people under the age of 18. And I give kudos to the people working in this area.
Right. It is challenging, but also worthwhile.
You bet. You bet.
And hopefully we're able to do a separate episode with experts in this field, as pediatric exoskeletons is not something that gets too much attention.
So I'm thinking here, Bobby, on what we've explained so far. We talked about basically assistive devices for spinal cord injury, that you would use that device kind of long term. We talked about rehabilitation devices. You'd use it for a while, use it for rehabilitation, and then stop using it. We've always talked about passive versus powered systems in other podcasts already. We've talked about pediatric systems. Any other broad topics you'd like to discuss?
Yeah, maybe just like literally just go through all of them, see if there's any applications. Since this episode is about applications of medical exoskeletons that we might have missed.
Right. Well, we talked about spinal cord injury. We talked about systems for stroke rehabilitation. We've talked about systems for the children. The systems for the shoulder, typically you practice reaching and then grasping or feeding tasks.
Yeah, this one is for Footdrop. So
Right.
classically, Footdrop is done with passive elastic bands and straps, but why not motorize it where it's a little bit more intelligent and it can assist with foot drops so you can clear every step, but also partially assist with movement.
Right. Right. I've even seen some links between functional electrical stimulation in an exoskeleton. So basically for Footdrop, you functionally stimulate, let's say, the muscle, help to lift the foot, but the exoskeleton also lifts the foot as well. So there's some combinations there.
Some devices are just purely to help you get from point A to point B. So they could be an ankle exoskeleton, they can be a hip exoskeleton, could be a knee exoskeleton, but kind of very similar to the military exoskeletons, how we talked about just getting through lateral movement.
Right.
Helping you get from point A to point B. The same very much applies to medical exos as well.
I remember a really nice paper. I think they were using a Honda system, and it was for stroke rehabilitation. And I think it was out of, Northwestern University and Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, where they put a hip exoskeleton on someone, and they just asked how many steps per day were you walking with an exoskeleton, and then if you had no exoskeleton, how many steps were you walking? And you significantly improved. Like maybe you did 1,500 to 2,000 steps a day if you didn't have an exoskeleton. But if I gave you an exoskeleton and you went home with it, you might not be taking perfect looking steps, but at least you're standing up and walking around doing 4,000 to 5,000 steps a day. So that getting people up and around and going from point A to point B.
I think this is a perfect time to mention also that a lot of these devices change the stride length.
Yes.
And for many people, they're capable of taking longer, more confident steps.
Yes.
And some of these are purely research and development devices, even though you can purchase them. They are not meant either for home use or for a rehabilitation center. They're meant for researchers to do biomechanic studies.
I don't think we talked about hands yet, but there's two hands here, a carbon hand and a dio glove. So I think it would be hands to help, rehabilitation or help to grasp and hold something, right? So your hand might be extremely weak, and so you'd like a device to help.
Yeah, and this is a great way to review what we've talked about. So you can have a power glove exoskeleton, which is used as part of a physical therapy program. As everyone that I've talked to that has had to go through physical therapy of the fingers has said that it's very repetitive, very tedious, and you need to have someone, in many cases, helping you with getting that initial motion. So you would have your hand down, you will have a physical therapist literally have their hand on top of yours and help you with that, getting those fingers mobilized. So we have power gloves for that. We also have power gloves which are for home use, for activities and tasks of everyday living, which could be like grasping on a shopping cart, grasping on a tool, be it a broom, or just trying to hold on to a sponge while you're cleaning dishes. So there you might not necessarily expect to get better, but you have a powered mobility aid for tasks of everyday living. And you also have the fixed frame devices where they might have compressors or controllers or other parts which are separate. They're usually going to be on a table or a cart that's near you. And that makes the exoskeleton components that are attached on your hand significantly lighter.
Yes, yes. 15, 18 years ago, I had worked with a company called Kinetic Muscles, and they were working on a hand mentor just to help. It was a fixed frame exoskeleton, just like you described, where it had a compressor sitting on the table, had a pneumatic muscle because that air was very compliant, very nice, and then you would try to help with the hand. I could also, just for researchers to think about topics, I remember, I don't think there's anything helping yet, but let's say you have hand tremors, so your hand is shaking. The idea is, could you build an exoskeleton for that? And there's no right answer yet. I don't think there was, because I remember talking to some researchers where you'd think you'd want to dampen out the hand and slow all those vibrations down. But a lot of times that's not what you want to do. You either want to give the person a fixed frame, like hold their arm and give them a fixed frame, and then the vibrations will stop, or you actually overcompensate those vibrations. And then the brain says, "Oh, I don't think I want that." And then they'll slow the vibrations down. So the human body is quite complicated, because you might think I want to do X, but you actually might want to do Y. So, but anyway, it's just some things for people to think about. I think that would be a nice topic in the future. Like there's people with, as you get older, you'll see hand tremors, and how could I help with that?
I think that was a topic that was popular maybe 8-9 years ago. I remember seeing even a couple of books that were just dedicated to Parkinson and hand tremors and exoskeletons, but I have not seen much lately on that topic.
Yes, neither have I.
You can rely on the user to self-balance, so specifically for the walking assistance exoskeletons. You can have the user suspended over a lift system. You can have the exoskeleton be attached to a wheeled cart, which is custom fitted. So that way, if you end up leaning one way or the other, you still have that balance. And for a while, there was even the idea of having like an R2-D2 companion robot, which would have the controller, the battery, and the heavy components that walks behind you as you're walking with the exoskeleton.
Well, I mean, that gets to, I don't think I see it here. People are actually talking about, and I don't know if that would be considered I don't know if it would be considered an exoskeleton at all, but people are talking about motorized walkers, and that was a big deal for a while, where I'd have a motorized walker and it would have sonar sensors and LiDAR sensors in front of it, and you would hold on to it and it would steer you around. But I don't think that's really an exoskeleton.
Well, I'm smiling because there was a company that had a prototype where it was a wheeled powered walker that would transform into an exoskeleton. So then you can take steps upstairs, downstairs, or sit, and then it would transform again into a wheeled walker.
Well, yeah, that's important, because that's quite important, because if I had a walker and it allows me, to be in the first floor of my house, but I need to get to my second floor, it's needed. let's see. I'm just trying to see if we missed any big areas.
Yeah, I don't think that we did, because
I
this
don't
is
think
not our speciality.
so I will say that too. This is not a big speciality of mine. I'd love to bring in some experts that focus on medical exoskeletons, and I'm thinking about some experts in Chicago, or some experts in Vanderbilt, or some experts in Boston. Where there's some exoskeleton researchers that work directly with hospitals. Like the university has a hospital, and so I'm thinking about some people at Harvard or Boston or Northwestern and things like that. So,
But also people have needs.
yeah,
People that are living with disability, people that are living with injury. So we don't want to give them false hope that the technology is better than what it's capable of delivering.
Yeah.
At the same time, we want to talk about the potential, the wonderful research that's happening. So we are trying to find that perfect middle ground, where objectively there's huge improvements, but also we don't want to get your hopes up and say that, oh, it's the first major breakthrough in 4,000 years.
Well, the reason I also get a little nervous is the arm. I was thinking this while we were talking. The arm exoskeletons have certainly shown improvement for whatever reason. Like, if I do reaching and feeding, I can get some improvement. There is still some journal papers out there, even now, like in the last couple of years, where they say that these legged devices aren't that helpful, right? You get the person up there, stand around, they walk, but when they sit back down, they're still never capable of walking again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we should save that for a deep dive episode.
Yeah.
Because like the last one I read, they did only 1.5 miles per month of using the exoskeleton.
Any last thoughts, Bobby?
This is an overview. I don't think that we need to be experts on the topic, because we've been collecting this information for more than a decade. I hope that we're able to get experts on the podcast, and that we will do deep dive episodes into each one of these applications. But this is just meant to be an overview of medical exoskeletons.
Thank you, Bobby. As always, I enjoyed working with you and enjoyed having another conversation. Thank you.
Hey, it's my pleasure.